Welcome back to the Caucus Corner, the podcast where policy meets the people. I am your host, Assemblywoman Micaela Salage, chair of the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Legislative Caucus. Every episode, we shine a light on the issues shaping communities of color and give voice to leaders working to make a difference. Today, we're diving into a long overdue conversation about the realities faced by workers in academic settings. Those who keep our schools and universities running behind the scenes. I'm talking about the custodial staff, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, adjunct faculty, graduate students, and much, much more. These workers often face gaps in employment during the summer and in holiday breaks, yet are denied unemployment insurance for something called reasonable insurance, a vague promise that they might have a job next semester. But as we've seen, especially during the pandemic, funding and enrollment shifts, we see that many of these workers are left behind in limbo or without income for months. That's why we're highlighting a critical piece of legislation sponsored by Assemblymember Valdez and Senator C. Ryan. This bill would ensure that more academic workers can access the unemployment benefits they've earned and shift the burden of proof back to where it belongs, on the employer. So stick with us as we unpack this bill, share stories from workers affected, and discuss how this legislation can bring fairness and dignity back to our academic workforce. Let's get into it. I first want to introduce a dynamic assembly member representing beautiful part of Long Island, I'm joking, of Queens. And so I'd like to introduce Assemblymember Claire Valdez.
Hi, thanks for having me, Chair. My name is Claire Valdez. I represent District 37 in Queens. That's Long Island City, Sunnyside, Woodside, Maspeth, and Ridgewood.
I always joke around. That's part of Long Island, right? No. Because it was the Queens borough. It's like my adopted borough. So we love Queens.
Shout out Queens.
Yes, shout out to Queens. Next, we are going to introduce Matthew Rodriguez, a strong labor member. Matthew, just give us a quick introduction.
Hi, everyone. I am a journalist and an adjunct instructor, and I'm a union member and a cat owner. And I used to live in Claire's district. I used to live in Woodside, but I am currently in Brooklyn.
Oh, very nice. And for our viewers, they don't see, or for our listeners, they don't really see the cat. What's the cat's name?
So this is one of three cats. She's the most social. Her name is Eartha, named after Eartha Kitt.
Ooh, very nice. Well, Eartha's our special guest.
Yeah.
She will go silent unless she meows. So let's start to talk about and unpack this wonderful bill for our listeners at home. So, Assemblywoman, for those who are unfamiliar, can you explain what that reasonable assurance means and how it currently affects academic workers' access to unemployment benefits?
Yeah, absolutely. So reasonable assurance is, as it sounds, the assurance that a university or a school will give to a worker, saying that, you know, you've finished your semester, you finished the academic year. In the next academic year, or when we come back in the fall, you're going to have a job. And so what that means is that the university or school can just say that. It can be written, it can be verbal. They don't really have to back it up right now. What that means, though, is that those workers then are not able to apply for unemployment insurance. And this happens to adjunct workers, it happens to substitute teachers, to bus drivers, to custodians. There's a really wide range of workers who are affected by this. And the burden really is not, is on the worker to prove that the school or university actually isn't going to have the funding, isn't going to have the enrollment that's necessary for them to do their jobs in the future. And the legislation that we're trying to pass now changes that. So the burden is on the university, is on the school, who obviously have much better assessment of what their finances are going to be, what their funding looks like, and what they can anticipate their enrollment to be. But it's been an issue for a long time. We're really hoping that we can get it resolved this session.
Thank you, Assemblymember. And Matthew, for our listeners, like, what type of workers are most impacted by this issue, and why have they been historically left out of unemployment protections?
Well, I will speak as I'm an adjunct instructor in in the higher learning space. And when we think about the type of workers specific to your question, I'm an adjunct instructor, and adjunct instructors for anyone who has been in an institution of higher learning in any capacity know that they play a huge role in the education of students, which is what higher learning is for. I have taught people at the undergraduate level, I have taught people at the graduate level, and introduction classes, electives, all these types of things. And when we talk about the type of worker, obviously New York State, when you're a full-time employee or an at-will employee, we're not people who are full-time at-will employees, but we are still expected to do all the work that comes with a class or that comes with teaching. So I was just talking the other day with someone about all of the invisible labor that goes into the role of an adjunct. So if you're a student and you see your instructor in class and you see them 2, 3, 4 hours a week, that labor before the class even starts, I have to write the syllabus. I have to go to meetings or interact with faculty and staff at the university, and just really lesson plan. What's the arc of the semester is going to look like. And then obviously there's work that happens outside of class hours that includes speaking with students, grading papers, and that's all unpaid labor. Under the way that higher education works right now, you're only paid for what are called contact hours, really. And so there's all of this invisible and unpaid work that goes into being an adjunct instructor or teaching and doing a lot of the type of work that we're talking about. So when we talk about the type of workers, we're talking about people who are not full-time, who are often made to do labor that goes unpaid because, when you have a full-time job, no matter what hour you work, you're kind of being paid for it. A lot of the work that adjunct instructors do is unpaid and invisible.
Yeah, and I'll just add here too, this bill addresses kind of two categories of workers, that the adjuncts that Matthew just spoke really beautifully about, and other workers at schools like custodial staff, like hourly clerical workers, bus drivers, who have been historically left out of the opportunity to apply for unemployment insurance because the law around unemployment insurance for those workers is really designed around full-time teachers. So teachers work 10 months of the year, but they're paid 12 months of the year. So they can't apply for unemployment insurance during the summer because they're still receiving a paycheck. These other workers aren't. And so they've been cut out, and this bill really addresses that kind of that gap. And if a school were to hire a third-party contractor like Sodexo to do their janitorial work, those workers would be able to apply for unemployment insurance. It's just if they're hired directly by the school, they aren't. And so this bill really wants to address that problem.
And I appreciate you taking your power and putting it in the legislative process. And so for our listeners, the bill number is A5860 and S5623. And who's our Senate sponsor?
It is Senator Chris Ryan, who comes out of CWA. So really happy to have some real union champions on this bill.
Excellent. And so, as mentioned before, this bill separates how we treat hourly workers from the way we treat adjuncts and grad students. Why make that distinction, and what inequalities are being addressed?
So the bill addresses them at the same time, even though they're kind of different, taken as different classes of workers in labor law. But, workers who are going without their normal jobs during the summer either have to scramble to find work to sustain them, or they're just going without. And it's profoundly unfair, especially when, as Matthew already said, the workers that we're talking about in this bill, adjuncts, staff at other schools, really are the backbones of the educational institutions that make our state incredibly, an attractive place for students to come, that really have bolstered our cultural institutions, so many other things. These workers deserve the same protections and benefits that every other worker deserves. I came out of working at Columbia University. I was the unit chair of Columbia support staff, UAW Local 2110. and we represented cashiers at the university. Those cashiers now will be able to apply for unemployment insurance if this bill passes, and that's huge. That can be life-changing for people who, again, work incredibly hard, make universities and schools run, and are often some of the lowest paid and most invisibilized workers on campuses.
And, I would just like to build off of that and say that being an adjunct, you're very much at the whim of the institution that you're working for, and that a lot of the work that we do before I was talking about it being invisible, it's also and invisible and unpaid. It can also vanish at any moment. So, for instance, I have had it happen to me several times now where low enrollment means that a class of mine gets canceled. And, sure, some people might say, well, people don't want to take your class. That's just, how the cookie crumbles. But, you know, at different points with the institution that I've worked for, it's been it feels like the goalposts can be arbitrary. A class can get canceled months before it runs, or they might, give you time to see if more students sign up. And it's really up to the whim of the institution. There's often not formalized processes. So I might think, oh, come the fall, I'm going to be making a certain amount of money, and then find out, as I did recently in April or May, that money is not going to be there. And then having to scramble, to use the word that the Assemblywoman used, to find something to replace it. And in my instance, as happened to me in the past, when my classes have been canceled, I've had to change my health insurance. I do get subsidized health insurance, or I used to get subsidized health insurance through my institution. But once my classes were canceled, I didn't make enough hours to qualify for that insurance. And thank goodness that we do have the New York State Healthcare Exchange available. But I had to go through the healthcare exchange to change my insurance. I lost my provider, both my primary care provider and my specialist. So I wanted to give your listeners a sense of how much can change really, and how much is outside of the hands of adjunct instructors.
As I hear you speak, the thoughts in my mind keep going back to like COVID-19 and when, a lot of folks just were, laid off. What lessons did COVID-19 pandemic teach us about this unstable academic employment?
I mean, as someone who lived through it, and also, my partner was laid off during the early months of the pandemic. I think that for me, the pandemic has really magnified and underscored the gaps that are present in our social safety net system. And I think that this bill is really about addressing, understanding, and identifying one of those gaps. And so for me, that gap, you know, the pandemic changed so much about our lives, and I still think that we're trying to understand the ramifications of it, and we're still living through it. I just want to be clear about that. The pandemic is not over. The pandemic is still it's still a living being, and it's still with us. Um, and so
Changed so much, like you said, changed so much of the
yeah,
world.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
And if I could add something really quickly, I think it also really demonstrated how fragile a lot of these institutions are and how vulnerable so many workers are to funding cuts and disruptions. And as we have entered this new federal administration, I think we're seeing even more cuts happen. More institutions are being punished for various political reasons. And this legislation really is crucial now to help protect workers who might be, at the whims of a federal administration that is not friendly to higher education. And so having some measure of stability goes a long way to help people who really are, again, like the backbone of our institutions.
And so right now we have this bill, going through the legislative process. Is there any opposition to the bill? What is the current status of it?
So it has passed the Labor Committee, very exciting, in our long, winding process to pass legislation. And now it goes on to the Ways and Means Committee. Hopefully, it will come to the floor. I think there's concern that especially public institutions will obviously have to pay for more unemployment insurance coverage. I think the state has the resources to make sure that those universities can do that our SUNY and CUNY colleges are well funded and have the resources, because, when they say, oh, this is going to be an expense to us, what that means is that's money that's not going to their workers who really need it in moments of unemployment. And so, that comes back to the state. We've got the resources. I feel confident that we'll be able to give them the money they need to make our workers whole. And so we're pushing forward. We have the backing of UAW Region 9A, NYSIT, UUP, PSC, many unions that represent adjunct workers and educational workers are behind this. So we continue to march on.
It seems like this bill really focuses on fairness and accountability. It's a shame that we as a state are not centering our workers, because we wouldn't be as strong as a state if it didn't have, great unions and workers who are moving it forward. And so definitely folks at home, what could they do to help encourage or get this through in the last couple of days of legislative session?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they can reach out to their representative, their state representative, either in the Assembly or the Senate. And we have a lot of co-sponsors already, and we're really proud and happy to have their support. But if you do not see your legislator on that list, give them an email, give them a call, and ask for them to speak up. As universities continue to rely more and more on adjunct workers, more and more people are going to be affected by this. And this is a really big constituency across the entire state that need relief. So people can show their support. Folks can join a union, form a union if they don't have one. It's always the best way to get change done. And stand with workers.
Yeah, I would just love to echo that, to say that I think that, if I could go back to my 11th grade AP Gov lesson that all politics is local, that it's important to get involved at the local level and to think about really the spaces where you can build power. So earlier we were talking about CUNY and SUNY. I am not an adjunct instructor there, but I'm a student at the CUNY Graduate Center as well. And so it's like, if that is your environment, then how do you build power there? How do you build power with students and with professors? Because solidarity is about understanding, your power as workers, and understanding that your role as a worker is, one of your most important identities in certain spaces. So I would encourage people to get involved at the local level, whatever that looks like for you, whether that's politically, at school, at the workplace, building a union, as Claire mentioned. So yeah.
Oh, this is such a great conversation. And I definitely want to make sure that listeners and guests alike, galvanize around this, because this is really, in these uncertain times, the issue I believe is going to come up over and over and over again, and if not, amplify. So I thank you both for really sharing your personal stories and advocating for this issue.
Thank you so much for the conversation. Solidarity forever.
Thank you for having me.